The chandeliers sparkled above the grand ballroom, casting glittering light over gowns worth fortunes and tuxedos tailored in Milan. Waiters glided between tables with silver trays, laughter mingled with the clinking of crystal, and a string quartet played in the corner. It should have been the perfect charity gala, the kind of night the city's elite bragged about for months. But perfection lasted only until Damien Westwood, a self-made millionaire, lost control. Clara Hayes, his 6 months pregnant wife, stood beside him, one hand resting on her rounded belly. She had dressed carefully for the evening in a soft emerald gown, trying to look radiant even as exhaustion weighed on her. For hours, she had smiled politely while Damien paraded around the room, introducing her only as my wife, while keeping his hand too often on the back of another woman's chair. Clara swallowed her humiliation, hoping to avoid a scene. But Damien had been drinking, glass after glass of vintage Bordeaux until his words slurred and his laughter turned harsh. Guests exchanged wary glances, the type of looks people share when they sense disaster looming but pretend not to see it. Clara tried to whisper, "Damien, maybe it's time to go home." Her voice was soft, pleading. Instead of listening, Damien's eyes darkened. He turned to her, his jaw tight. Always nagging Clara, always ruining the moment. He raised his hand, not to strike, but to hold his glass of red wine high above his head. For a brief second, the crowd hushed, unsure if he was about to propose a toast. Then, the unimaginable happened. With a sudden, violent motion, Damien hurled the glass at his wife. It wasn't just a spill. It wasn't an accident. The crystal shattered into sharp fragments as it slammed against the marble floor at Clara's feet, exploding like gunfire in the silent ballroom. Red wine splashed across her gown, staining the soft fabric in dark streaks that looked eerily like blood. Clara gasped, her hand tightening over her stomach as 1,000 eyes turned toward her. The mistress smirked in the corner, whispering something to her friends. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, gasps rippled like a wave. Someone shouted, "Call security!" Clara stumbled back, her heart racing, the sting of tears blurring her vision. For a terrifying moment, she felt a sharp cramp in her belly and thought she might collapse. Guests rushed forward, some reaching to help, others too frozen by the scandal to move. Then the sirens wailed outside. Police officers in dark uniforms stormed into the ballroom, pushing past the stunned crowd. Their radios crackled, their voices sharp. "Step aside, please. Make way." The music had stopped. The glittering illusion of wealth and power dissolved in an instant. Damien still held the neck of the shattered glass, his chest heaving, his face pale now that the consequences had arrived. Clara stood trembling, her body shaking not only from fear but from the realization that the world had just witnessed the truth about her marriage. And yet, what no one knew was that this was only the beginning, because Clara had a secret that would turn Damien's life upside down forever. The police reached for Damien's arm, and in that charged moment, the entire ballroom held its breath. Before the shattering glass, before the flashing cameras and the police storming into the ballroom, Clara Hayes had been just another woman trying to hold her world together. To the outside eye, she was the lucky wife of a millionaire. She lived in a penthouse with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. She wore designer gowns when Damien demanded her presence at events. She smiled for photographs even when her heart was breaking. But beneath the glitter, Clara's life was anything but enviable. Clara had grown up far from luxury. She was the daughter of a small-town mechanic and a school librarian in Ohio. Their lives were simple, filled with Friday night dinners at the local diner and summers chasing fireflies in the backyard. Clara's dream had never been riches. It had been art. She loved painting, loved the way colors could tell stories without words. She put herself through college working as a waitress, finally earning a degree in fine arts. It was at a gallery opening, while she was working part-time as an assistant, that she first met Damien Westwood. He was already successful back then, a man with sharp suits and sharper ambition. He charmed her with his confidence, dazzled her with promises of security and adventure. To Clara, who had always struggled to make ends meet, Damien seemed like a dream. Within a year, she became his wife. At first, he was attentive, even tender. He showered her with gifts she never asked for, spoke of their future with a conviction that made her believe she was safe. When Clara discovered she was pregnant, she thought her happiness was complete. She imagined building a family rooted in love, not money. But reality came fast and brutal. Damien's love turned conditional, his temper unpredictable. He criticized her body as it changed with pregnancy, belittled her artwork as childish hobbies, and reminded her constantly that everything she had was because of him. Whenever she resisted, he cut her off with a cold glare. "Don't forget who you are without me," he would say. Still, Clara tried. She cooked his favorite meals, attended his galas, stayed quiet when whispers of mistresses reached her ears. She told herself it was for the baby, that enduring his cruelty was worth giving her child a stable life. But every night, alone in their massive penthouse, she felt the walls closing in. Clara had secrets, though. She had kept her connections to the art world, small as they were. A gallery owner in Brooklyn still admired her work. An old college friend, now a lawyer, had once told her, "If you ever need help, call me." These tiny lifelines were tucked away, hidden from Damien, guarded like treasures. And then came the pregnancy complications. Exhaustion, dizziness, and quiet panic attacks she never confessed to her husband. She endured them silently, because Damien's eyes never softened at her pain. On the night of the gala, when Damien hurled the glass, Clara knew something inside her had broken too. Not just fear, but the illusion that she could survive by staying silent. Because for the first time, Clara realized that her silence might not only cost her dignity, it might cost her child's future. The Bright Horizons charity gala was the kind of night society pages adored. Hosted at the Crystal Renaissance Hotel, it was a spectacle designed to impress. Marble floors reflected the glow of chandeliers imported from Vienna. Tables were dressed in silk cloths embroidered with gold thread, while crystal vases overflowed with roses flown in from Paris that morning. A string quartet played Mozart in the corner, their polished bows gliding across strings as though the music itself were stitched into the fabric of the evening. Outside the hotel, black limousines lined the street, each door opening to reveal the city's elite. Business moguls with wives draped in diamonds, socialites in couture gowns, politicians hungry for photo ops, they all walked the red carpet into a world that sparkled on the surface but reeked of hidden agendas. The gala was more than charity. It was currency, a place where reputations were traded, alliances forged, and enemies quietly measured. Damien Westwood thrived in such an environment. He was at the center of every circle, shaking hands, laughing loudly, introducing himself as if the night were built solely to showcase his success. His tuxedo was sharp, his cufflinks heavy with platinum, his voice commanding enough to silence smaller men. He drank from his glass with the ease of someone who believed he owned the room. And by his side stood Clara. Her emerald dress shimmered under the chandeliers, but her beauty carried a different weight, softer, gentler, as though she did not belong among the predators in the room. She held her small clutch tightly, every smile she gave carefully rehearsed. Her hand often rested on her belly, a silent reminder that she was carrying something far more precious than all the wealth gathered in that ballroom. Whispers followed them as they moved through the crowd. Guests smiled, but their eyes lingered too long. Clara felt the weight of their stares, sensing the curiosity, the judgment. Was it admiration for Damien's power, or pity for the woman clinging to his arm? She couldn't tell. At their table, the air grew heavy with another presence, Damien's mistress. She sat just close enough to be noticed, her crimson dress blazing like fire in the sea of muted elegance. She laughed at his jokes, raised her glass when he raised his, and leaned forward with a confidence Clara could never imitate. Guests noticed, and though no one spoke directly, the scandal was already weaving itself into hushed conversations. Clara tried to breathe steadily, her chest rising and falling as though she were drowning beneath invisible waves. She told herself to endure, to make it through the night for appearance's sake. But as Damien's laughter grew louder, his hand brushing against the back of the mistress's chair, Clara felt cracks form inside her carefully constructed facade. And then, the moment that would destroy the illusion arrived. Not yet the glass, not yet the sirens, but the silence before a storm. The music faltered for just a beat, and Clara caught the mistress's eyes on her, filled with something sharp, something cruel. It was in that charged pause, beneath the glittering chandeliers, that Clara sensed the night was about to collapse into something no one could control. Damien Westwood had built his reputation on the illusion of control. To the world, he was a self-made millionaire, a man who rose from nothing and carved his fortune with brilliance and grit. Reporters admired him, investors trusted him. Socialites whispered his name as though he were untouchable. But behind the carefully crafted mask, Damien was something else entirely. He was arrogance in a tuxedo. At the gala, his arrogance poured out of him like the wine he kept refilling in his glass. He barked orders at waiters as if they were servants in his personal mansion. "Faster with the champagne!" He snapped at one young man whose hands shook beneath the weight of the silver tray. He laughed when the server nearly dropped a glass, calling him pathetic, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. The crowd chuckled nervously, eager not to be on the receiving end of his disdain. Then there was the way he flaunted his mistress. Roxanne Croft, 26 years old, all curves and cunning, dressed in a scarlet gown that clung to her body like fire. Damien leaned close to her, whispering things that made her laugh a little too loudly. He brushed her hair from her shoulder as though his wife, seated only a few feet away, didn't exist. Guests tried to avert their eyes, but scandal was oxygen in a room like this. They breathed it in, savoring the humiliation Clara was being forced to endure. Clara sat quietly, her hands folded, her smile frozen. She could feel the stares burning into her, feel the whispers curling around her like smoke. Damien didn't care. He thrived on dominance, on proving that he could do what others wouldn't dare. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was about cruelty. Damien took Clara's glass of sparkling water and replaced it with a flute of champagne, smirking as he pushed it toward her. "Come on, darling," he said loud enough for the table to hear. "A little drink won't hurt. Stop being so boring." Clara shook her head gently, resting her hand on her belly. The others chuckled at his joke, but she caught the flicker of unease in a few eyes. They knew she was pregnant, and his mockery wasn't charming. It was chilling. But Damien didn't notice. He never noticed. He was too wrapped in himself. His stories grew louder, embellished with each sip of wine. He bragged about the deal he'd closed, the competitors he'd crushed, the empire he was still building. He spoke as though money was his crown and the world his kingdom. Every sentence carried the same message. He was untouchable. Yet cracks were showing. His words slurred, his gestures sharpened. Roxanne tried to soothe him with a hand on his arm, but he shrugged her off with a glare. The room was watching now, silent beneath the music. Clara lowered her eyes, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. And then Damien turned his gaze on her. His smile vanished, replaced with a sneer. "Don't just sit there, Clara," he spat. "At least try to look like you belong here." The words sliced through the air like knives, and in that moment the mask of the charming millionaire fell away, revealing the monster beneath. The gala was reaching its peak. Guests mingled between courses, laughter echoing under the chandeliers, while the press discreetly snapped photos of every dazzling smile. But at the Westwood table, the atmosphere was growing heavier, darker, ready to erupt. Clara sat rigidly in her chair, her emerald gown stained from an earlier spill Damien had carelessly caused. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, but her eyes kept drifting to the crimson figure across from her. Roxanne, Damien's mistress, glowing with confidence, every laugh at his jokes like a dagger to Clara's chest. It was bad enough that Roxanne was here at all, but what happened next would sear itself into every guest's memory. Damien, glass in hand, stood abruptly, commanding attention without even trying. His voice boomed over the gentle hum of the orchestra. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, slurring slightly from the wine, "allow me to introduce you to someone very special." Clara's heart tightened. For a split second, she hoped he meant her. That maybe, despite everything, he would remember his wife, the mother of his child, and give her a shred of dignity. But no, he extended his arm toward Roxanne. "This stunning woman," Damien declared, his eyes glittering with arrogance, "is the one who truly understands me, the one who makes me feel alive. She is my future." The room froze. Gasps rippled across tables. Silverware clinked as forks slipped from stunned fingers. Someone whispered, "Isn't his wife right there?" Others turned their eyes toward Clara, their pity disguised as curiosity. Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her, Her chest tightened, her vision blurred, her ears rang with the sound of 1,000 whispers. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish, but her body betrayed her. She sat still, hands trembling, tears burning her eyes, but refusing to fall. Damien wasn't finished. He reached for Roxanne's hand, pulling her up beside him. Roxanne smiled coyly, basking in the spotlight. He leaned in and kissed her, long and deliberate, in front of everyone. Cameras flashed, capturing the scandal in real time. The cruelty was complete. Clara's face turned pale, her heart pounding so hard she thought the baby inside her could feel it. She pushed back her chair, struggling to rise, but her legs shook violently. "Damien! Damien, please!" she whispered, her voice barely audible, a plea more for her unborn child's safety than for her own dignity. But Damien turned to her with a mocking smile. "Oh, Clara, don't look so shocked. Everyone knows you were never enough for me." His words, sharp and merciless, cut through the air. The crowd stirred uncomfortably, murmurs of disapproval mixing with the thrill of scandal. Clara's lips quivered, but before she could reply, Damien lifted his glass of red wine high. For a moment it looked like another toast, another chance for him to gloat, and then he hurled it. The crystal exploded at her feet, red liquid splashing across her dress like blood. Guests screamed. Someone shouted, "Stop him!" A waiter dropped his tray with a crash. Clara stumbled back, clutching her belly in terror. And in that horrifying silence, every eye turned to her, just as the sirens wailed outside the ballroom. The ballroom was chaos. The once elegant gala had dissolved into gasps, whispers, and hurried footsteps as guests scattered, desperate to escape the scandal. Police moved in, their voices sharp, commanding Damien to step aside, while security attempted to shield Clara from flashing cameras. But Clara could barely hear them. Her body trembled, her breath ragged, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might stop altogether. The red wine clinging to her dress felt like blood soaking through her skin. Her mind spun, and all she could think was, the baby. Please, not the baby. She stumbled toward the exit, heels clicking unevenly on the marble floor, her hands clutching her stomach. Her vision blurred, lights streaking into dizzying patterns. A wave of nausea hit her, and she pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of the officers asked gently, but Clara couldn't answer. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her throat felt tight, like she was drowning. She lowered her gaze to her trembling hands. They were slick with sweat, her nails digging into her palms. The humiliation replayed in her mind in brutal detail. Damien's voice declaring Roxanne as his future. His lips pressed to the mistresses in front of hundreds. The mocking sneer when he told her she was never enough. And then, the shattering glass, the spray of red, the gasps, the silence. It was too much. Clara collapsed into a velvet chair in the lobby, her body folding in on itself. Tears finally spilled, hot and relentless, sliding down her cheeks as her chest heaved with sobs. She tried to hold them back. She hated crying in public, but the dam had broken. People passed by, whispering. Some pitied her. Others filmed her with their phones, hungry for a viral clip. Clara turned her face away, but there was no hiding. She was exposed, stripped of dignity, broken. Her thoughts spiraled darker. Maybe Damien was right. Maybe I was never enough. Maybe I was foolish to think love was real. Maybe my baby deserves better than me. The self-blame was poison, seeping deeper with every heartbeat. Her stomach cramped sharply, pulling a strangled cry from her lips. She pressed both hands over her belly, rocking slightly, whispering through tears, "I'm sorry, little one. I'm so sorry." For a terrifying moment, she thought she might lose the baby right there, in the middle of the hotel lobby, under the cold eyes of strangers. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, panic clawing at her chest. Then, through the blur, she heard a voice. Calm, steady, familiar. "Clara, breathe. You're going to be all right." She looked up through tear-stained lashes, disoriented. A man stood before her, tall, his presence anchoring the storm inside her. His voice cut through the chaos like a lifeline. Her lips parted in shock, recognition dawning. She knew that voice. She knew that face. It had been years, but she could never forget. And in that instant, as her world crumbled, Clara realized she was no longer alone. Someone from her past had just stepped back into her life. Clara blinked through her tears, her breath still uneven, her hands clutched protectively around her belly. For a moment she thought she was hallucinating, that her grief had conjured up a ghost from her past. But no, The man standing before her was real, solid. His presence commanded the space, making even the chaos of the lobby fall into a hush. "Clara," he repeated softly, his voice carrying both urgency and warmth. "It's me, Ethan." Her heart skipped. Ethan Blackwell. The name alone unlocked 1,000 buried memories. He had been her college friend, her confidant, the one who had once believed in her art when no one else did. They had drifted apart when life pulled them in different directions. She into Damien's glittering world, he into a business empire of his own. Rumors had painted Ethan as a ruthless CEO, a man feared on Wall Street. Yet standing in front of her now, his eyes weren't cold. They were steady, concerned, and heartbreakingly kind. Clara struggled to form words. "Ethan, what are you? How are you here?" "I was invited to the gala," he said simply, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to her. "And then I saw what happened. I couldn't stand by." She hesitated, but her trembling fingers extended the fabric. She dabbed at her tear-streaked cheeks, trying to compose herself, though her body still shook. "Everyone saw," she whispered bitterly. "Everyone. He humiliated me in front of the whole city." Ethan's jaw tightened, a shadow of anger flashing across his face. "Clara, what Damien did wasn't just humiliating, it was criminal. Throwing that glass at you, endangering you and your baby. He crossed a line tonight that he can't come back from." Her lips quivered, her strength wavering. "But what can I do? He controls everything. The money, the house, even the people around me. I have nothing." Ethan crouched slightly, bringing himself to her eye level, his voice lowered, firm yet reassuring. "That's not true. You have more than you realize, and you are not alone anymore." Something about the way he said it made Clara's breath catch. For the first time since the glass shattered, she felt a flicker of safety, of hope. She looked into Ethan's eyes and saw no pity, only resolve. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "Why are you helping me? After all these years, why now?" He held her gaze steadily. "Because I should have helped you long ago. Because I watched you disappear into Damien's shadow, and I regretted every day that I didn't stop it. And because—" He hesitated, his voice softening. "Because you and your child deserve better than this nightmare." Clara's chest tightened with emotion. For a moment, she let herself believe him. The chaos of the hotel, the flashing cameras outside, even the pain in her heart seemed to fade under the weight of his words. But before she could answer, a sharp voice echoed across the lobby. "Clara." She froze, her body stiffening. Damien had broken free from the police officers, his face flushed with rage, his eyes locked on her like a predator spotting prey. And in that moment, Clara realized the night's horror was far from over, because Damien wasn't finished with her yet. The hours after the gala blurred into fragments for Clara. Sirens fading into the night, police reports scribbled onto forms, the echo of Damien's furious shouts as security dragged him away. But through it all, Ethan never left her side. His steady presence anchored her when she felt as if she were drowning. He guided her gently into his car, away from the flashing cameras. The leather seat smelled faintly of cedar and safety. For the first time in months, maybe years, Clara let herself exhale without fear of Damien's voice snapping at her. She leaned against the window, clutching her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "We're safe. At least for tonight." Ethan didn't press her to talk. He only drove in silence, giving her the space to breathe. Finally, he pulled up to a sleek apartment building in Midtown. Not ostentatious like Damien's penthouse, but elegant and private. "Stay here," Ethan said softly, "just until you decide your next step." Clara hesitated. "I can't. I don't want to be a burden." Ethan's eyes met hers. "You're not a burden, Clara. You're someone who deserves protection, and right now, I can give you that." The apartment itself was warm, with soft lighting and modern furniture that somehow felt welcoming instead of cold. Clara sank into the couch, her exhaustion weighing her down. But beneath that fatigue, a spark ignited, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Possibility. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, memories replayed like broken film reels. Damien's cruelty, the humiliation, the glass shattering at her feet. She pressed her hands to her belly, whispering, "I can't let him destroy us. I won't." For the first time, her words weren't desperate. They were a vow. The next morning, Ethan knocked gently before entering the living room with 2 mugs of tea. "Green tea for me, chamomile for you," he said with a faint smile. Thought you could use something calming. Clara accepted it, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting second. Warmth spread through her chest, not just from the tea but from his quiet kindness. I want to fight back, she said suddenly. Her voice was still fragile, but it carried an edge of determination. Ethan leaned forward. Then let's do it. Damien has money and influence, but I have resources too. Lawyers, investigators, people who don't bow to his kind of power. If you're ready, we'll build a case against him. Clara's throat tightened. Part of her was terrified. Part of her still heard Damien's voice telling her she was nothing without him. But another part, a stronger part, was rising now. He almost hurt the baby, she whispered. I won't let him win. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. Then we start today. Clara straightened in her seat. The woman who had once shrunk in the shadow of her husband was gone. In her place was someone new. Not fully strong yet, but growing. Transforming. And just as hope began to bloom, Clara's phone buzzed on the table. One new message. No name. Just a number she didn't recognize. She opened it, and her blood ran cold. The text read, You think you're safe with him? You have no idea what's coming. The message still glowed on Clara's phone screen, its threat burning into her eyes. You think you're safe with him? You have no idea what's coming. Her stomach tightened with dread, but instead of collapsing in fear, she clenched the phone in her hand. Damien wanted her terrified, paralyzed. Not this time. Ethan noticed the shift in her expression. What is it? She showed him the message. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. It's him. He's trying to intimidate you. Clara's voice trembled, but carried a steel edge. He won't stop until he destroys me. Unless I destroy him first. The words shocked even her. For months, she had endured, silenced, hoping Damien would change, that love could save their marriage. But love was long gone. Tonight, she understood. The only way forward was to expose him. To make the world see the monster behind the millionaire mask. Ethan leaned back, studying her. Then we do it smart. You don't fight someone like Damien with emotion. You fight him with evidence, timing, and precision. And when we're done, he won't be able to hurt you or your child ever again. The plan began that very morning. Ethan contacted his team of private investigators, people who had uncovered scandals that toppled CEOs. Clara sat with them, hands folded, listening as they detailed what they already knew. Damien's offshore accounts, his mistress's luxury condo, paid in cash, secret recordings of him threatening employees. The trail of corruption was long and ugly. But what made Clara's chest tighten with both fear and resolve was the evidence they already had from the gala. Dozens of videos of him throwing the glass. The press had them, but Ethan's team ensured they had copies that couldn't be buried by bribes. Clara watched the clip once. Damien's rage, her flinch, the shattering glass, it was all there. Undeniable. Painful, but powerful. You'll use this? She asked quietly. Yes, Ethan replied, but not just this. We'll show the full picture. His infidelity, his abuse, his corruption. By the time we're finished, Damien Westwood won't be able to walk into a boardroom without people spitting his name like poison. Clara swallowed hard, her hands shaking. And if he comes after me? Ethan's gaze softened, though his tone remained firm. Then he'll have to go through me first. The days blurred into nights of preparation. Clara sat in meetings, reviewed documents, signed statements. With every step, she felt pieces of her old self breaking away. The timid wife, the silent victim. In their place rose a woman who refused to be broken again. And then came the announcement. Damien would host a press conference to clarify the scandal at the gala. It was his attempt to spin the narrative, to paint himself as the victim of rumors. The moment Ethan's team heard, they seized it. This is your chance, Ethan told her. You'll be expecting to control the story, but you'll be there, and you'll take it from him. Clara's heart raced. The thought of facing Damien publicly again filled her with dread, but also with something new. Power. Because this time, when the cameras turned on, the world wouldn't see a broken wife. They would see Clara Hayes, ready to burn Damien's empire to the ground. The press conference was staged like a theater performance. Rows of cameras lined the back of the luxurious ballroom, reporters clutching notepads, their microphones bristling like a forest of questions waiting to be unleashed. The air was thick with perfume, cologne, and the faint static of anticipation. Damien Westwood stood at the podium, polished as ever, his tuxedo crisp, his smile rehearsed. He began with a practiced tone, smooth and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I want to address the lies and exaggerations that have spread since the unfortunate incident at the Bright Horizons Gala. My wife, Clara, is under stress from her pregnancy, and emotions sometimes run high. The truth is, nothing happened beyond a misunderstanding. Gasps rippled through the room. Clara, standing at the back beside Ethan, felt her stomach twist. A misunderstanding? The man had nearly struck her with a glass, humiliated her in front of hundreds, and now he was twisting it into her fault. Damien spread his hands, his charm oozing. I am deeply committed to my family. Any suggestion otherwise is slander, likely fueled by competitors jealous of my success. He chuckled softly, a sound rehearsed to disarm. You know how the media loves a scandal, the crowd murmured. Some reporters frowned skeptically, but others scribbled eagerly, ready to print his version. For a moment, it seemed Damien might succeed in rewriting the narrative. Until Clara stepped forward, the room shifted instantly. Heads turned, cameras swung, flashes erupted like fireworks. Gasps filled the air as Clara Hayes, radiant in a simple but powerful navy dress, walked toward the podium. Her belly showed clearly beneath the fabric, her steps steady despite the weight of the world on her shoulders. Damien's face drained of color. Clara, what are you doing? His voice cracked beneath the microphone. She didn't answer him. Instead, she turned to the crowd. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger with each word. I'm here to tell the truth. The truth Damien is desperate to bury. Silence gripped the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. He didn't just humiliate me, Clara continued. He threw a glass at me, while I'm 6 months pregnant with his child. You all saw the videos, you know it's real, but that's only the beginning. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. Ethan, standing proudly in the shadows, had prepared it with her. She pressed play. Damien's own voice filled the ballroom, sharp and venomous, recorded on a night he thought no one was listening. You're nothing without me, Clara. Nothing. If you ever try to leave, I'll make sure you regret it. The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed wildly, and Damien's face turned crimson with rage. That's fake, he bellowed, pounding the podium. She's lying! But the evidence was undeniable. And Clara, her chin lifted high, looked him in the eye with a calm fierceness he had never seen before. Because for the first time, Damien realized the power had shifted, and he was no longer the one controlling the story. The moment Clara's recording ended, the press conference erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted over one another, cameras clicked furiously, and the sharp white glow of flashes burned against Damien's paling face. His carefully constructed mask, charming, untouchable, invincible, was cracking for the world to see. Mr. Westwood, do you deny threatening your wife? One journalist shouted. Is this how you treat the mother of your child? Another demanded. Are the rumors about your mistress true? A third voice cut through the din. Damien raised his hands, trying to control the storm. This is outrageous. Lies, all of it. That recording is fake. Clara is confused. She's unstable. His voice grew shriller, desperate. But the more he spoke, the worse it sounded. His arrogance no longer impressed. It reeked of guilt. Clara stood firm, her voice steady even as her heart thundered. I am not unstable. I am a woman who has been silenced, humiliated, and abused. Tonight, I refuse to be silent anymore. Her words rang clear, cutting through the noise. The crowd roared with questions, but the truth was already spreading. Within minutes, social media was ablaze. Clips of the recording trended worldwide. Headlines flooded every feed. Millionaire Damien Westwood exposed by pregnant wife. Glass-shattering scandal, wife speaks out. The fall of a mogul. Across the city, television screens replayed the footage of Damien sneering at the gala, the glass exploding at Clara's feet, and now, the damning recording. Commentators dissected every frame. Talk shows invited experts to discuss emotional abuse. Advocacy groups flooded platforms with messages of support for Clara, hailing her as a symbol of resilience. Meanwhile, Damien's empire began to unravel at lightning speed. His board of directors held an emergency meeting, shareholders panicked, and sponsors pulled out of upcoming projects. The same men who once laughed at his cruel jokes now whispered behind closed doors, plotting how to sever ties before his downfall tainted them. Roxanne, the mistress he had paraded with so proudly, vanished overnight. She deleted her accounts, packed her designer gowns, and disappeared from the penthouse he'd bought her. Loyalty had never been her strength, and Damien's collapse was not a battle she intended to fight. For Clara, the shift was dizzying. Hours ago, she had been a broken woman weeping in a hotel lobby. Now, strangers on the street stopped to hug her, telling her she was brave, that she had given other women courage. Messages flooded her phone. Old friends reaching out, journalists requesting interviews, women sharing their own stories of survival. Yet even as support poured in, Clara's chest ached. She wasn't naive. She knew Damien wouldn't go quietly. His pride was too sharp, his ego too vast. A man like Damien Westwood would fight to the bitter end, clawing to preserve whatever scraps of power he could. Still, she lifted her chin, one hand resting protectively on her belly. For the first time in years she felt something new, something powerful. Help. But just as the world celebrated her victory, Damien made his next move, one that would threaten everything she had begun to rebuild. For 2 days, Damien Westwood vanished from the public eye. His penthouse curtains stayed drawn, his phone lines went silent, and his usual entourage of assistants and bodyguards dissolved like smoke. The world thought he was hiding, licking his wounds while his empire collapsed. But Damien wasn't the kind of man to surrender. He was plotting. The first strike came through the media. Early one morning, headlines screamed across tabloid covers. Clara Hayes battling depression. Sources claim she's unfit to be a mother. Grainy photos of Clara, taken secretly during her breakdown at the hotel, were splashed across screens. She was shown crying, clutching her stomach, her face streaked with mascara. Damien's anonymous insiders painted her as hysterical, unstable, and manipulative. Clara's heart sank when she saw them. "He's trying to take the baby from me," she whispered to Ethan, her voice trembling. Ethan's expression hardened. "Yes, he wants to flip the story, make you the villain, himself the victim. But we're not going to let him." Still, the attack shook her. For every message of support she received, there were trolls online parroting Damien's narrative, calling her a liar, a gold digger, a woman out for revenge. The cruelty of strangers pressed down on her like a suffocating weight. But Damien wasn't finished. His lawyers filed an emergency petition in court, claiming Clara was mentally unfit and demanding temporary custody of their unborn child once delivered. It was outrageous, manipulative, and cruel, but exactly the kind of move Damien thrived on. Clara sat in Ethan's office, her hands shaking as she held the papers. "He wants to take my baby," she said, her voice breaking, "even before it's born." Ethan leaned across the desk, his voice low and steady. "He won't succeed. We'll fight this. I promise you, Clara, he will not win." But Damien's reach was vast. Judges, politicians, old friends from elite circles. He called in every favor, offering bribes, twisting arms, spinning lies. Soon, whispers filled the city that maybe Clara wasn't so innocent. Maybe Damien had been the wronged husband after all. The pressure mounted. Paparazzi camped outside Ethan's building, shouting cruel questions whenever Clara stepped out. "Are you unstable, Clara? Do you drink while pregnant? Did you fake the abuse?" Each word cut deeper, reopening wounds she thought were healing. One night, Clara sat curled on Ethan's couch, tears streaming silently down her face. "Maybe he's right," she whispered. "Maybe I'm not strong enough for this." Ethan knelt beside her, gently lifting her chin until her eyes met his. "Don't you dare believe that. Damien is powerful, yes, but he's also desperate. Desperation makes men reckless, and recklessness makes them weak. You're stronger than you know, Clara. And I'll stand with you every step of the way." Her chest ached, but she nodded. A flicker of determination returned to her eyes. Because while Damien was preparing his next ruthless strike, Clara was quietly gathering the one weapon he could never defend against: the truth. The legal battle was heating up, and every day felt like a war Clara wasn't sure she could win. Damien's lawyers flooded the court with motions, his allies filled the press with venom, and Clara felt trapped in a maze designed to crush her. But then, in the middle of despair, came the first glimmer of hope. It happened late one evening. Clara sat in Ethan's office, reviewing documents his team had collected. Piles of contracts, receipts, bank statements, all of it painted Damien as greedy and corrupt, but none of it seemed powerful enough to end him. Clara's eyes blurred from exhaustion as she flipped through another stack of papers. Then her fingers froze. It was an old email chain, buried deep in archived files from Damien's company. At first, it looked like routine business, project updates, financial forecasts. But hidden between the lines was a single message, marked confidential. Clara's pulse quickened as she read it. It was Damien, instructing a partner to move the funds offshore before the board catches on. Attached were records of secret accounts in the Cayman Islands, millions siphoned from investors. Fraud, embezzlement, crimes that could destroy not just his reputation, but his freedom. Clara's hands shook as she handed the file to Ethan. He read in silence, his jaw tightening with every line. Finally, he looked up, his eyes blazing. "Clara, this isn't just evidence. This is a bomb. If we drop this, Damien won't just lose his empire. He could go to prison." Her breath caught. The thought of Damien behind bars seemed almost unreal. But part of her hesitated. If I use this, if the world sees this, won't he come after me even harder? Ethan leaned forward, his voice firm. "He already is. He wants to take your child. He wants to break you. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about ending him before he ends you." Clara sat back, pressing a hand to her belly. The baby kicked gently, as if reminding her what was at stake. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and nodded. "Then we use it." The next days were a blur of strategy. Ethan's investigators verified the accounts, traced the money, and secured testimony from a former employee Damien had bullied into silence. The puzzle came together piece by piece, forming a picture so damning it made even the toughest lawyers flinch. But the most powerful piece was still Clara's. In Damien's arrogance, he had once boasted to her late at night after too much wine, bragging about how untouchable he was. Clara had quietly recorded the conversation, storing it away on an old phone she thought she'd never use. Now, listening to his drunken voice brag about hiding millions offshore, she realized she held the nail for his coffin. Ethan placed the phone gently on the table between them. This, combined with the documents, it's over for him. Clara's chest tightened. For the first time, she felt like victory wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. But just as they prepared to deliver the evidence to the authorities, Clara's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a photo. Her own apartment, lights on, curtains drawn back. Someone was watching her. The photo burned in Clara's mind long after the message disappeared from her phone screen. It was her apartment window, captured from the street at night, the curtains drawn back. Someone had been watching her, close enough to take a picture, bold enough to send it. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just Damien's lawyers or his smear campaigns. This was a threat, a warning. She showed the message to Ethan, her voice trembling. "He knows where I am. He's not just trying to ruin me in court. He's watching me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we take this seriously. I'll have security posted outside. No one gets near you without going through them." But Clara's unease lingered. She moved carefully through the apartment, closing blinds, checking locks, double-guessing every sound in the hallway. The safe haven Ethan had given her now felt like a cage under surveillance. 2 nights later, the threats escalated. Clara returned from a prenatal checkup to find an envelope taped to the apartment door. Inside was a single page, scrawled in Damien's handwriting. "You think you're clever, Clara, but you and that baby are mine. Don't forget it." Her knees nearly buckled as she read it. Every letter screamed possession, control, the same cruelty she had endured in whispers at home now carved into paper. Ethan read the note and immediately called the police. Officers came, documented the threat, and promised to investigate. But Clara saw the doubt in their eyes. Damien was powerful. His money bought silence, favors, protection. Would they really stand against him? The following day proved her fear right. On her way to meet Ethan at his office, Clara noticed a black car trailing behind hers. At first, she thought it coincidence. But every turn she made, the car followed. Panic clawed at her throat. She pulled into a busy cafe, heart racing, and ran inside. From the window, she saw the car idle for several minutes before finally driving off. Clara pressed a shaking hand to her belly, whispering, "Stay safe, little one. I won't let him hurt you." Ethan's security team doubled their watch, but even he couldn't mask his fury. "He's desperate," Ethan told her. "He knows we have evidence strong enough to destroy him. This is intimidation, Clara, and intimidation means we're close to winning." Still, Clara's fear grew into resolve. Damien could threaten, stalk, and smear her name, but she refused to back down. Every note, every shadow outside her window, every car that followed her only strengthened her determination. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child's future. That night, she lay awake in the dim glow of the city lights, her mind replaying Ethan's words. "We're close to winning," but victory felt fragile, like glass in her hands. And just as she began to drift into restless sleep, her phone buzzed again. Another message. No words this time. Only a video. When she pressed play, Clara saw footage of herself inside Ethan's apartment, asleep on the couch. The camera angle was from inside the room. Clara's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. The video played in silence, a grainy clip of her sleeping on Ethan's couch. Her hair was tousled, her hand resting protectively on her belly, her chest rising and falling in the rhythm of exhausted slumber. But what chilled her blood wasn't seeing herself. It was the angle of the camera. It was filmed from inside the apartment. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. This was taken here, while I was asleep." Ethan's face hardened as he leaned over to look. His fists clenched, his jaw tight with rage. "That means someone got past my security. Someone was inside this building." The realization hit Clara like a physical blow. The sanctuary that had given her peace, the one place she thought Damien couldn't reach, had been violated. Her skin crawled, every shadow in the room suddenly threatening. "How?" she asked, panic breaking through her voice. "How could he get in?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "He couldn't. Not on his own. Someone had to let him in." The word hung between them like poison. Betrayal. Ethan immediately called his head of security, demanding answers. Within minutes, his team scoured the building, checking surveillance feeds, reviewing logs. Clara sat frozen on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself, rocking gently as if to shield her unborn child from the invisible danger closing in. An hour later, the truth surfaced. One of the night guards, an older man with years on the job, had been bribed, paid in cash to look the other way while someone entered Ethan's floor. The guard admitted it under questioning, shame written all over his face. "It was Westwood's men," he confessed. "They said it was just to drop off papers. I didn't think." Clara's stomach churned. Damien's reach was everywhere, his money able to buy silence, even loyalty. No matter where she ran, he found a way to invade. Ethan dismissed the guard and tightened security, but Clara could see the fury burning in his eyes. "This is war now," he said, voice low and dangerous. "He crossed the line. He came into my home. He put you and your child at risk. And I swear to you, Clara, he will regret it." But Clara's fear wasn't so easily soothed. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of light made her jump. She couldn't shake the image of someone standing over her as she slept, watching her with unseen eyes. It was more than intimidation now. It was psychological torture. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat awake, staring out the window, determination slowly replacing terror. Damien wanted her broken, but all he had done was ignite a fire she didn't know she carried. Clara whispered to herself, "If he wants a war, he'll get one." And as if the universe had been listening, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a calendar invitation. Court date, custody hearing, set for 1 week later. Damien was making his move. The courthouse was a cathedral of tension. Polished marble floors reflected the cold morning light, while the hushed whispers of reporters echoed through the halls. The case of Westwood versus Westwood had drawn a crowd. This wasn't just a custody hearing. It was a public war between a disgraced millionaire and the pregnant wife who had dared to defy him. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back neatly, her rounded belly visible beneath the fabric. She looked fragile, but inside, every muscle was braced for battle. Ethan sat behind her, his silent presence steadying her nerves. Across the room, Damien looked every bit the man he wanted the world to believe he still was. His suit was perfectly tailored, his expression calm, even charming, but his eyes betrayed him, sharp, calculating, simmering with hatred. He leaned close to his lawyer, whispering, smirking as if victory were already his. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the session to order. Damien's attorney stood first, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Your Honor, this case is about the safety and well-being of an unborn child. My client, Mr. Westwood, has serious concerns about his wife's mental stability. As evidenced by her public breakdowns and erratic behavior, we fear she cannot provide a safe environment for the child once it's born. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Clara's chest tightened, but she forced herself to sit tall. The lies stung, but she had expected them. Then her attorney rose. Your Honor, what the defense calls breakdowns were the direct result of Mr. Westwood's abuse. We will present evidence of his violence, his threats, and his reckless disregard for both Clara and her unborn child. This is not a case of a mother unfit to raise her child. This is a case of a powerful man trying to erase the woman who dared to expose him. The judge nodded gravely. Proceed. Piece by piece, Clara's team unveiled the truth. The video of the glass shattering at the gala. The threatening notes, the surveillance footage of the bribed guard, and finally, the damning audio of Damien's drunken confession about hiding millions offshore. Each revelation chipped away at his polished facade until whispers of shock filled the courtroom. Damien's composure cracked. He slammed his fist against the table, shouting, "She's lying. She's destroying me with lies." The judge's gavel banged sharply. "Mr. Westwood, control yourself or I will hold you in contempt." Clara's heart pounded. For once, it wasn't her being silenced. It was him. Her attorney turned to her. "Mrs. Hayes, will you take the stand?" Clara rose slowly, every step heavy with the weight of years of silence and fear. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore her oath, and faced the courtroom. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I am not perfect. I've been afraid, I've cried, I've doubted myself, but I am not unfit. I am a mother, and I will do whatever it takes to protect my child, from Damien, and from anyone else who thinks they can control me." The room erupted with murmurs. The judge raised her hand for silence. And just as Clara finished her testimony, Damien's lawyer pulled out a sealed envelope, one that could change everything. The courtroom went silent as Damien's lawyer slid the sealed envelope across the table. His lips curled into a thin smile, the kind of smile that told Clara he believed he'd already won. "Your Honor," the attorney began smoothly, "before we continue, my client would like to submit new evidence. Evidence that raises serious doubts about Mrs. Hayes' ability to provide a safe and stable home." Clara's stomach twisted. Her lawyer shot her a quick glance, whispering, "Stay calm. This is theater. Don't let him rattle you." But Clara's palms grew clammy. She had seen that smug expression on Damien's face before. It meant he was certain he had found a way to crush her. The judge opened the envelope, pulling out glossy photographs. She studied them with a frown before passing them to the clerk, who placed them on the screen for the courtroom to see. Clara's breath hitched. They were photos of her, leaving Ethan's apartment late at night, her hand resting on her belly, her face pale from exhaustion. Another showed her entering his car, his hand steadying her as she stepped in. And the last, the cruelest, caught her asleep on Ethan's couch, a blanket draped over her. Damien's lawyer's voice dripped with false sympathy. "As you can see, Mrs. Hayes has been living not with her husband, not in her marital home, but with another man, Mr. Ethan Blackwell, her so-called protector. A man with whom she clearly shares more than a friendship. This behavior is not only inappropriate, it suggests reckless instability during pregnancy. Your Honor, is this truly the environment in which a child should be raised?" A murmur spread through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and Clara felt her world tilt again. She wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that Ethan was only helping her survive, but she could already see the narrative forming. The abandoned wife, already in another man's arms. Damien leaned back in his chair, smugness radiating from him. He mouthed the words, "I told you so." Clara's lawyer rose quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. These photos prove nothing except that Mrs. Hayes sought refuge when her life and her unborn child were in danger. To twist her survival into immorality is yet another act of cruelty by Mr. Westwood." The judge raised a hand for silence, her face unreadable. "I will allow this evidence into the record. However, I remind both parties that innuendo is not fact. The court will decide based on proof, not speculation." Still, the damage was done. Clara's cheeks burned as whispers filled the gallery. She could feel eyes on her, judging, questioning. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her baby kicking anxiously inside her. She lowered her gaze, gripping the edge of the table. For a moment, doubt threatened to drown her. Was Damien going to win after all? Was the world going to believe his lies again? Ethan leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Clara, look at me." She lifted her tear-filled eyes. "This isn't the end. We still have what he fears most, the evidence. When we play it, his entire empire will collapse." Clara nodded, drawing strength from his words. But before they could present their bombshell, Damien rose suddenly with a smirk and announced he had one final witness waiting outside. The courtroom doors creaked open, and every head turned. Damien's smirk widened as the bailiff escorted in a woman Clara hadn't seen in years. Her breath caught. No, not her. It was Marissa, her former college roommate, once a close friend, now a ghost from a painful past. Marissa looked polished, her tailored suit crisp, her hair swept neatly into a bun. But her eyes, sharp and cold, told Clara this wasn't a reunion of friends. "Your Honor," Damien's lawyer said smoothly, "we call Marissa Collins to the stand." Clara's stomach twisted. She remembered the last time they had spoken. Years ago, after a bitter falling out when Marissa accused Clara of abandoning her friends once Damien entered the picture. Marissa had always envied the attention Clara received in the art department, and Clara had walked away from the friendship rather than fuel the bitterness. She never thought she would see her again, let alone here, weaponized by Damien. Marissa took the oath and sat confidently, her gaze briefly flicking to Clara with something between disdain and triumph. "Miss Collins," Damien's lawyer began, "can you tell the court about your knowledge of Mrs. Hayes's mental state?" Marissa leaned into the microphone, her voice calm, almost sympathetic. "Yes, I lived with Clara during college. She struggled with mood swings, intense anxiety, and periods of depression. She often said she felt like she wasn't good enough, that the world was against her. Once, she even locked herself in her room for days after a breakup." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Clara's chest tightened, her hands trembling against the table. Marissa continued, her words cutting deeper with every sentence. "I cared about her, I really did, but Clara has always been fragile. I'm not saying she's a bad person, just that she's unstable. And raising a child, well, I worry she won't be able to handle the pressure." Damien's lawyer nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Miss Collins. No further questions." Clara's lawyer rose swiftly, his tone sharp. "Miss Collins, when was the last time you saw Clara Hayes?" Marissa blinked. "Years ago, maybe 6 or 7. "So you have no first-hand knowledge of her current life, her current stability, or her ability to care for her unborn child?" Marissa hesitated. "Not first-hand, no." The lawyer pressed harder. "And isn't it true that you and Clara ended your friendship on bad terms? That there were unresolved resentments?" Marissa stiffened. "That's irrelevant." "On the contrary," the lawyer countered, turning to the judge. "This testimony isn't about Clara's present. It's about dredging up half-truths from the past, delivered by someone with clear personal bias." Clara sat frozen, her heart pounding. The words were true, but she couldn't stop the sting of betrayal. Marissa had once been like a sister to her. Now she was a dagger in Damien's hand. The judge looked unimpressed. "Noted. Miss Collins, you may step down." As Marissa left the stand, she cast Clara one final look, lips curving into a faint, victorious smile. Clara's throat tightened with rage and grief. Ethan leaned close, whispering, "He's grasping at ghosts. Don't let this shake you." Clara nodded faintly, but her insides trembled. And then Damien rose again, his voice smug as he declared, "Your Honor, before the defense rests, I have one more piece of evidence. Something that will shatter Mrs. Hayes's credibility once and for all." Damien's footsteps echoed as he strode to the center of the courtroom, a predator savoring the kill. His smirk was sharp, his eyes glittering with cruel triumph. He held a slim folder in his hand, the contents clutched like a loaded weapon. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "before the court makes any decision, I must submit this. It proves beyond any doubt that my wife has lied, manipulated, and deceived you all." The bailiff carried the folder to the judge. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Ethan leaned forward, whispering, "Stay strong. He's desperate. This is theater." But even he looked tense, his jaw tight. The judge opened the folder. Inside were printed bank statements, highlighted in garish yellow. She flipped through several pages before raising her brow. "Mr. Westwood, these appear to be financial transfers in Mrs. Hayes's name. Explain." Damien's grin widened. Gladly. Ladies and gentlemen, while Clara paints herself as a victim, here is proof she has secretly moved thousands of dollars into a hidden account. An account under her maiden name. Money taken from our joint finances without my knowledge. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Clara's stomach dropped. She stared at the papers on the projector screen, her name glaring back at her. Damien's lawyer pounced. Clearly Mrs. Hayes planned this. She wasn't a helpless victim. She was siphoning funds, preparing to run away with another man, perhaps even with Mr. Blackwell here. He gestured toward Ethan with mock disgust. This is not the behavior of a responsible mother. This is fraud. This is betrayal. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Clara's ears roared, the murmurs of the gallery blurring into a storm of judgment. Her voice cracked as she whispered, I never did that. I didn't take his money. But Damien's voice boomed over hers, slick and confident. Lies, Clara, always lies. First you smeared me with fake recordings, now you pretend you didn't touch the accounts? These transfers prove otherwise. Tell them, Clara, tell them how you've been stealing from me while pretending to be some tragic victim. Clara's chest tightened, her throat dry. She wanted to scream, to fight, but fear threatened to choke her. What if the court believed him? What if they saw her not as a mother fighting for her child, but as a thief? Ethan rose suddenly, his voice calm but commanding. Your Honor, we request a recess to review this so-called evidence. My client has nothing to hide, and we will prove these documents are forged. The judge studied both sides before nodding. Very well. Court will reconvene in 1 hour. She banged her gavel, and the room erupted into noise. Clara sat frozen, tears pricking her eyes. He's winning, she whispered. He's turning everything against me. Ethan placed a hand over hers. His eyes blazed with certainty. No, Clara. He just fired his last bullet, and when we return, we'll show the world it's nothing but smoke and lies. Clara swallowed hard, her fear warring with hope. But as she stood to leave the courtroom, a reporter shoved a phone in her face, already flashing headlines. Clara Hayes accused of secret fraud. The world was turning against her. The recess felt like an eternity. Clara paced the small consultation room, her hands trembling as she clutched the forged bank documents Damien had unveiled. Headlines already flooded the internet, branding her a thief, a manipulator, an unfit mother. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until she could hardly breathe. What if they believe him? She whispered, her voice breaking. What if I lose the baby to him? Ethan gripped her shoulders, his gaze unwavering. Listen to me, Clara. This is his last desperate move, and we can prove it. Trust me, you are not losing today. When the court reconvened, the tension was suffocating. Damien strutted back to his seat, smug and certain, while reporters leaned forward like vultures awaiting the kill. Clara sat tall, though her heart hammered in her chest. The judge rapped the gavel. Court is back in session. Mr. Blackwell, you may proceed. Ethan rose, holding a slim black folder. Your Honor, the defense claims my client siphoned funds into a secret account. We reviewed the documents, and here is what we found. He handed them to the bailiff, who delivered them to the bench. The judge examined the papers, her brows furrowing. These statements, Ethan continued, bear Mrs. Hayes' name, but the account number listed belongs not to her, but to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. A company traced back to. He turned, his voice cutting like steel. Damien Westwood himself. A stunned silence gripped the courtroom. Damien shifted in his chair, his smirk faltering. Ethan pressed on. Furthermore, we obtained the metadata from the files. They were created less than a week ago by someone on Damien's legal team. In other words, Your Honor, this so-called evidence is a forgery. An elaborate, clumsy attempt to frame my client while concealing his own embezzlement. Gasps erupted. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashing like fireworks. The judge's expression hardened as she set the papers down. Mr. Westwood, she said coldly, do you have any response? Damien leapt to his feet, his voice shrill. Lies, all of it. This is a setup. He pointed a trembling finger at Clara. She's behind this. Enough, the judge's gavel thundered. Sit down, Mr. Westwood. Clara rose slowly, her voice steady, clear. For years he told me I was nothing, that I couldn't survive without him, that no one would believe me. But today the truth is here. He is the liar, he is the criminal, and I will not let him take my child. Applause burst from the gallery before the judge silenced it. She turned to Clara, her expression softening. "Mrs. Hayes, the court finds in your favor. You retain full custody of your child, and in light of the evidence presented, Mr. Westwood will be referred to federal authorities for investigation." Damien's face collapsed, fury and fear twisting into one. Security moved closer as he shouted, but his words were drowned by the storm of cameras capturing his fall. Clara exhaled, her hand resting on her belly, tears of relief streaming down her face. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and proud. For the first time in years, Clara felt free. The monster was defeated. The truth had triumphed, and a new life, for her and her child, was finally beginning. So the story has closed, my dear friends, and if you are still here with me until this very moment, it means something in Clara's journey has touched your heart in its own way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it whispered hope into a quiet corner of your soul. Life can be cruel, people can betray us, but like Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Clara's story is not just about pain, it is about courage, healing, and reclaiming dignity. And that is something we can all carry into our own lives. If this story has moved you, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who may need courage, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue this journey together. Because healing is never done alone, we walk it side by side. So the story has closed, my dear friends. And if you are still here with me until this very moment, it means something in Clara's journey has touched your heart in its own way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it whispered hope into a quiet corner of your soul. Life can be cruel, people can betray us, but like Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Clara's story is not just about pain. It is about courage, healing, and reclaiming dignity. And that is something we can all carry into our own lives. If this story has moved you, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who may need courage, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue this journey together. Because healing is never done alone. We walk it side by side.